Hey, what's going on everyone? I'm Jakejames Lugo, and welcome to the channel, where you'll find some of the most fair and honest game reviews out here. So recently, I've been playing Indiana Jones and the Great Circle before its release, courtesy of Machine Games and Bethesda, so big shout outs to them, and believe me when I tell you, there is a lot to say about this new game. So where do I stand on this? This is a brand new Indiana Jones game that takes place in between Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. There's a lot of people that are big Indiana Jones fans out there, and they've been looking forward to this game for quite a while, myself included. And with someone like Machine Games working on this, if you know any of their work from the Wolfenstein series, you know that this is going to be a perfect pairing, or at least is perceived to be a perfect pairing. So where do I stand on this brand new game? Honestly, I enjoyed it for what I played. The game is about 18 or so hours by the time I finished this and rolled credits. There's a bunch of stuff to do in this game. If you're a big fan of like exploration and first-person shooter elements to this, you're going to really enjoy what they have here within the Great Circle, because again, it blends a lot of the classic, fun elements of Indiana Jones and an Indiana Jones adventure with some of the stuff that you've seen from the Wolfenstein series, with its different mechanics, with first-person shooting, exploration, cinematic storytelling. There's a lot of great stuff in here that's all working together, and I think it worked out for the better. Now, I'm going to keep this review as spoiler-free as I can, because obviously there's a lot of story in here, and if you're someone that loves Indiana Jones and you love that universe, I don't want to spoil anything for you, especially with some of the stuff involving the puzzles. There's a lot of story elements that kind of get played into that, so I'll try to keep things spoiler free, but I'm going to talk in generalities about the game itself and about the story and the plot that you experience while you're playing this. Bottom line is this: if you love the Indiana Jones movies, or if you followed the character in different forms of media, you're going to love this story without question. But what about everybody else that isn't a big fan of Indiana Jones? Are you going to get something really interesting and engaging with this? I would say yes, but you have to come at it with the understanding that it's not going to be as fast-paced or not as crazy or over-the-top as something that you would get from something like Uncharted or the Tomb Raider series. I find that the plot of Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is a little bit more reserved and a little bit much more relaxed in comparison to games like that. You could even say the same thing about previous games that Machine Games has worked on with the Wolfenstein series, because those are pretty action-packed, but there's still action in here, but not as fast of a pace of what you might be used to. Now, don't get me wrong, you're still going to be dealing with a lot of adventure elements, exploring ruins, discovering different hidden secrets from ancient times, as well as also punching and fighting Nazis, which is all part of the Indiana Jones universe. But still, you have to come at this with the understanding that this is a different type of character compared to those other games. So if you have that in mind, I think you're really going to enjoy this plotline. Speaking of which, I will say, without spoiling too many elements of the characters and the storyline, Troy Baker was a perfect casting for Indiana Jones. His voice sounds almost exactly like Harrison Ford, and it would look really weird or be very out of place to have somebody else voice this character if they didn't sound like Harrison Ford in some way. As well as also, Indiana Jones looks like Indiana Jones in this game, which is the best thing you could possibly do. Otherwise, it wouldn't be an Indiana Jones story. But what about everybody else? You get different characters such as Gina. You also get Tony Todd in his last performance being a character that plays into the whole mystery of the Great Circle, which I find, again, it was fun to see him in there. This is one of his last performances, and it was sad that we lost him, but at least he gets to play a character that looks like himself, and he happens to be part of an awesome universe like Indiana Jones, and I think that worked out for the better. Some of his stuff that plays into the big plot and also his conclusion, some people might not like overall, but still, I feel like you're getting something very interesting and very fun to follow. Granted, if you're a fan of Indiana Jones type of storytelling. Now, I will say, with the story itself, by the time everything reaches its conclusion, it does kind of end a little abruptly. It's very similar to something like Raiders of the Lost Ark, or even something that you got from like Temple of Doom, where things are kind of wrapped up pretty fast towards the end, even though you're spending a lot of time building up this kind of mystery and getting this really big buildup of some of the different enemy characters, like the Nazis that you deal with, some of the bad archaeologists, and other things that play into the mystery of the Great Circle. Again, if you're not really a fan of like those slow buildups, you might have a problem with that, but it works for Indiana Jones. That's exactly what you're getting from the classic movies. And by the time you reach the end, without spoiling any elements there, if you know what happens in an Indiana Jones film with some of the stuff that goes on with these ancient relics and ancient things that people are trying to find, then it pretty much fits that bill, and I think you're going to be satisfied, especially if you love those movies. Now, all of that being said, let's move on from story and talk about gameplay, because I think part of the joy of an experience like this is going into it without knowing anything related to the story. I feel like there's a lot of surprises and a lot of big twists and turns that you'll get more out of if you know nothing about them. but the gameplay of Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is something we definitely need to talk about because there is a lot going on in here. As I mentioned before, the action in here is a lot more slower paced in comparison to something like Wolfenstein, which is so chaotic, but it works out to the benefit of Indiana Jones and the Great Circle because the exploration and the discovery is really more the highlight in here, which I think works best for something like Indiana Jones. You're going to be exploring different ruins and various locations and continents, going through ancient puzzles and trying to discover hidden artifacts and see how this greater mystery about the Great Circle ties all together. And I feel like what I love about this game is that when you discover something and you solve a puzzle or you go to a new location where you have to figure out something really intricate in order to move on to the next area, the game really does its best to really make you feel like, okay, you're being Dr. Jones trying to figure out these different puzzles and put together all these clues in order to find out what does it mean to actually be part of, or what is it actually so important to the world and all these different people of getting involved with something like the Great Circle. And I think that actually is really cool with this experience here because that's exactly what you get out of the Indiana Jones movies. It's all about him not so much punching out Nazis, but more about him actually discovering these mysteries and trying to solve them and learning more about the ancient world. In that regard, it works out pretty good. You're going to be in first-person mode most of the time. You're going to be going from different location to location, talking to different people, finding different like caves and caverns and different tombs, exploring what they have to offer, solving the puzzles and the mysteries behind them. All of that works out pretty good, and it's presented very well in the first-person perspective. You are Dr. Jones in that regard, with the exception of a few spots when you actually pull out the camera and you're like traversing certain areas. You're going to be using his whip to go from location to location, jumping over gaps, fighting enemies. I think that stuff is pretty darn cool, and again, works out for Indiana Jones. In the midst of all this, you have those beautiful visuals, which I think look fantastic. Indiana Jones looks like himself, but all these other characters look pretty darn good, especially Tony Todd as well. But the locations and the environments themselves, I think, are highly detailed. They look fantastic. But what makes it even better are the musical cues. You get to hear that little jingle from the Indiana Jones theme in certain specific spots when you solve certain like mysteries, when you're actually going from one location to another, when you're exploring the area around you. You get to hear that, and it works out well because I think the timing is really on point. One thing that I also think works to the game's benefit is the lighting that makes all these visuals and the overall presentation all the better, because when you're in certain locations and things are very bright, it's very bustling with different NPCs roaming around you. I think it looks cool, especially when you go to like some sort of village or town when you have to go to a key location and actually get some more information. But when it comes time to go to those dark and dank caverns or a tomb that you need to explore, the lighting gets very dramatic. And I think, again, it works out great for something that has a real focus on adventure and exploration. You don't want everything all bright all the time, especially when you're going to be lighting torches to light up certain key spots when you're trying to solve a puzzle. I think that is actually really cool and is very authentic to Indiana Jones. And again, if you're a fan of this character and a fan of this universe, this is exactly what you want to see. And it's very different than what you get from Uncharted, from the Tomb Raider franchise, and others that are very similar but might be heavily inspired by Indiana Jones. Now, I will interject one little thing in here about bugs and glitches that I ran into. Granted, I'm playing this game early, so there's no day one patch. It's before release. I'm pretty sure they're going to release some sort of update or day one patch that's going to iron out most of this stuff, but I did run into a few little technical hiccups, mostly with the presentation. There's just a couple objects that are probably popping in from the distance or texture pop in at various different times. Also with the lighting, some of the flare when you go from location to location, like if you're coming out of a cavern into the, outside or back in again, there'll be a couple little hiccups with some of the lighting, but also there was a few moments where I was trying to grab onto certain ledges and Indiana just wouldn't grab it probably the first time around, but a second or third try, he'll probably grab onto it. Little things like that aren't really that much of a big deal, but they are there, and maybe some people might experience them at various points, but I do think like we're going to get an update or a patch day one that's going to iron out all that stuff. So by the time you play the game on the retail version of it, it'll be totally fine. At the same time, outside of the main quest where you're going to be doing the bulk of all these different things I mentioned, you also get these little side quests called field work, as well as also mysteries that you could solve and actually get more information about that's going to help you do all these main quests. And I think that's really cool because outside of those main quests there, you still are going to do even more exploration and discover other things that you're not going to get within the main storyline. And again, it's all about exploration and adventure and discovery and just that intrigue of the unknown, which I feel like is really good. Machine Games did a great job at really emphasizing all of this and really putting you into into the shoes of this character with stuff like this, like the different field work. And there's a bunch of different missions to do in all the locations you go to, and I found it to be very fun. I found it to be very interesting. You get little story tidbits that still tie in to the main storyline, even though there's still side stories. It's just, to me, I found that to be a whole lot of fun. Now, I will say, there are a couple of moments during some of these missions and side stories and little mysteries you have to solve where things become a little bit annoying, where some of the answers or what exactly you need to do isn't made all that clear. There was a couple of moments when I was trying to solve a mystery where I was given some sort of information from a note or given some sort of like object where I needed to actually do something with it, and it wasn't really clear what exactly I needed to do. What you do get is a camera that allows you to take pictures of some of the different puzzles or different locations. And if you take a picture of the puzzle, Indiana Jones himself will give you a hint in order to solve what you need to do. And sometimes it works and it's totally fine. Other times I didn't really need it. But then there's those little puzzles where you don't even have the ability to get a hint in order to figure out what you need to do. And I found that a little bit annoying because it was a tiny bit inconsistent. I wish that some of these side missions and side like mysteries all enabled you to do that same exact thing, because there were just moments where I was just genuinely confused and I had all the information in front of me, but I couldn't figure out what exactly to do. It doesn't happen very frequently, but it definitely happens. And for some people, including myself, I'm probably going to have to look up a guide if somebody else solves it online, because it just felt like it just wasn't presented in a clear enough fashion what exactly I need to do and how to solve a certain mystery. At the same time, there are different pieces of information from like notes and other objects that you need to gather that I sometimes feel like are a little bit illegible, because you have to look at the notes themselves and not so much the text of the information. The game does a nice job of actually like translating some stuff to regular just English or just regular print if there's like a bunch of scribbles or there's different like languages you have to decipher. But sometimes you have to look at these notes and actually use them like a table or some sort of puzzle element in order to solve something. And at moments, like, it just doesn't make that information very clear, or it's illegible, which I find a little bit annoying. Could be because of some of the script that they're using, could be some of the placement and just the design of the documents themselves. If things were made a little bit more clear, or at least some of the information on there was put into print or given another extra hint, it might make that stuff a little bit easier. But for some people outside of myself, I feel like that some people are going to struggle with it because of just the way that they're presented. It's part of the experience, I understand that, but there are just certain moments with the game where you need to be a game and things just need to be presented in a clear fashion, and I didn't always get that from some of the objects that I was finding. Here's another thing that goes hand in hand with that: the map that you actually have whenever you go to another location, but also the fast travel system. I absolutely do not like the fast traveling in Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. I found it to be very archaic and very annoying, especially towards the late game when you're trying to go to different locations very frequently in order to solve some of the mysteries you might have missed out on when you were doing the main quest. Just the way that they go about it, I'm not a huge fan of. There's just something very annoying about not being able to go into my map or go into the menu and use like some sort of like option to fast travel to a location, because it's so much easier than having to go find these like different signposts within a given location. There's a bunch of them scattered on a map where you actually have to go to them and look at a specific sign if you want to go fast travel to a specific region of that area. I get what they were doing here and I'm totally fine with it being in the game, but there's got to be an easier way to do that when you're actually in the late game and you're trying to find other locations or solve other mysteries that you missed out on the first time around, or certain locations where I'm trying to figure out exactly where I need to go and what the names of certain locations are, and I can't figure that out because the map doesn't show it when I'm actually looking at the map, but also there's no other option to just use just to pick an option of a location where I need to go. It just wasn't done in a very good fashion. I found it to be very annoying towards the end of the game. It didn't bother me during the main quest because I was following and discovering all these different areas, but once at some point during my game, I just found it to just not be very helpful. So I really do hope, fingers crossed, that there's some sort of update that adds onto it where you can just fast travel to locations through the menu, because it'll make things so much more easier. Something else I should mention that's both a good and a bad thing for this experience are the disguises that Indiana Jones can gather throughout his travels. There's a bunch of different outfits you could find that you could put on that allows you to go to different locations and explore different areas without being detected. There's a big stealth element to some of the big missions where Indiana Jones could dress up as like a priest, he could dress up as one of the enemy Nazis, he could dress up as a local with the different turban and other stuff, depending on the location that he's going to, and it helps you kind of get into certain areas that he wouldn't be able to do so normally. I love that. It's part of the character. You definitely see that in the Indiana Jones movies, and I think it's a great addition. However, the big issue is towards the late game, where that becomes almost a necessity in order to get to certain locations, to pick up just a simple object to continue on during certain missions. I feel like once you get the Nazi outfit in some of these different areas, you are able to wear it and just not be detected by anybody. There are moments, however, where certain enemies that are like a captain or a higher ranking official could still kind of be suspicious of you. So there is an element of that kind of, messes around a little bit with the stealth. But once you get to the late game, once you finish the main storyline, or at least are about to do so, none of that really matters because you pick up this outfit and you can just roam around for free, and that's totally fine. And I just find that it becomes necessary to use that in order to get certain objects for some of these side missions. It becomes a real struggle if you don't do so. It almost is like night and day when it comes to actually going through the game later on in the experience. Now, one thing I definitely want to focus on here is the combat, because I find that the combat fits well with the character, but there are just certain things about it I think could have been a little bit better. Obviously, with Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, it's not going to be as chaotic with the action compared to Wolfenstein, where you're not going to be just going into a location and gunning down every enemy in sight. However, what I do love is that there's an emphasis on hand-to-hand combat, obviously Indiana Jones's whip, and also using everyday objects around you when you're trying to be stealthy in order to take out certain enemies. It just fits with the character, it fits with the tone and the type of story that we're going with here. However, this is a very big if or asterisk to all this. There's a point that not only where it becomes super repetitive, but it almost becomes comically ridiculous in some locations. Obviously, with stealth being a big part of the experience and the character of Indiana Jones getting around some of the obstacles he has to deal with, there are just some spots where I feel like the stealth is a little bit wonky, where you're with another character that's accompanying you into certain locations, and while you might need to stay hidden, your other character is just roaming around right in front of the enemies and not being detected. It just looks goofy. Obviously, this is just probably a little bug or something they probably have to fix, but it just looks goofy in the moment where it's like Mike ally is right there. They're just standing right in front of this enemy, and the enemy is just standing there going, I don't think there was anything. I don't see anything here. It just does not look right. It looks ridiculous, and I really do hope, and I'm pretty sure that they're going to patch that at some point. At the same time, there are moments when you're actually trying to be stealthy and you just get detected on a whim. You could actually be seen through a little crevice of something or some sort of object that's in front of you that seems a little bit ridiculous as well. But what's even more ridiculous is when I'm able to hand-to-hand combat 5 or 6 enemies at the same time, all coming at me with different objects and guns and stuff, and I'm able to just wipe out the whole crew. Obviously, not really intended for that to happen, but it is a little bit goofy, and I feel like that might also be something that might get patched up a little bit. You do have the ability to upgrade Indiana Jones's abilities with the amount of damage he does in hand-to-hand combat, some of his stealthy elements like hitting people with objects and stuff, and that's fine. That does come into play with a lot of things, but there are just some moments where you're just sitting there and be like, wow, I just 1v7 or 1v10'd this entire location, this entire complex I just took out for free, and yeah, it just looks ridiculous. The other part of this is that there are certain big encounters within the main story that do feel like big boss encounters, at least as much as they possibly could. I'm not going to spoil the specifics of them because they're tied very heavily to the main story, but some of them did feel a little bit underwhelming, not only with what exactly you're doing, but also just the way that they're presented. You would think that there would be much more of a bigger encounter or some sort of bigger set piece towards the very end of the game, even though, again, this fits very much in tone and very much in theme with all the other Indiana Jones stories from the movies. There's some sort of bigger encounter towards the end that, for some people, might feel a little bit underwhelming, but if you know anything about Indiana Jones, you'll feel like it matches up with everything else. But again, as a game, some people might not like it. To be honest, I think it's really dependent on how much you're invested within this story, as well as also how much you care about some of the other side characters outside of Indiana Jones. Just the way that things go about and the way things kind of unfold and play out is going to be different for everybody out there. Some people will really like it, especially if they love Indiana Jones. Some people might feel indifferent about it, and other people, I definitely foresee some of them really hating it. But with all of that being said, how does Indiana Jones and the Great Circle feel overall as an experience as a game? I still do think that this is a solid game. I do think that this is an enjoyable experience. If you love Machine Games, some of their backlog portfolio, this is very different for them. But if you love Indiana Jones, and if you just want a fun adventure game to play on your Xbox console or PC, and I know eventually it's going to come to PlayStation, I feel like you could really enjoy this. I think that this is a solid game. It's something that's interesting. It's fun to go through all this stuff, especially if you know what you're getting into. I think that this is a very solid experience to come out at the very end of 2024, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty darn good. So there you go. Those are my overall thoughts about Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Again, big shout outs to Machine Games and Bethesda for letting me play it early so that way I could talk about it with you guys. Let me know some of your thoughts about Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, or Indiana Jones in general, down below in the comments section. Leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you can. Tell me in the comments exactly what your favorite Indiana Jones movie is. Are you going to play the Great Circle whenever you get a chance? And what else do you want to see with Indiana Jones as a character? If this game ends up getting a sequel, what type of stories do you want to see happen within that future game, or something else to go on with the story of Indiana Jones? Tell me about all that stuff down below in the comments section. And of course, as always, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more videos like this, and I will talk to all of you again very soon. This channel is sponsored by Flynn's Arcade and More, located in Margate, Florida. Flynn's is one of the premier spots for gaming fans in South Florida. They have a variety of arcade games on cabinet for you to play throughout the week, including all of your beloved classics. You could also play a ton of new and current console games too, on PlayStation, Xbox, and Nintendo consoles. Grab a snack or drink and enjoy the best gaming experience you'll find. Visit during one of their many big events to connect with the gaming community in South Florida. Want to test your skills in competitive fighting games? Join any of the weekly tournaments that happen at Flynn's for a chance for some cool prizes. And if you're into tabletop gaming or model kit building, there's a bunch of events there for you too. Swing by Flynn's Arcade and More, located in Margate Boulevard in Margate, Florida. You won't find a better spot than Flynn's.